This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins. Here with me is my co-host, Michael Riedel of the New York Daily News.
They are the unsung heroes of Broadway. They provide the structure, the spine, the dialogue to Broadway's big musicals. They are the musical book writers, and here with us are two of the top Broadway musical comedy book writers, Peter Stone, who is the author of, or has written the musicals 1776, My One and Only, The WILL ROGERS Follies, and is currently at work on Titanic, and John Weidman, who wrote the books to Assassins, Pacific Overtures, and Big. Gentlemen, welcome to Theater Talk.
Thank you.
John, before we plunge into the topic, I do have to ask you about Big, which closed last month and lost somewhere between $10 and $12 million. What went wrong, and do we blame the book writer in this case, as so often happens on Broadway?
Well, you know, it's interesting. 20 years ago, when I worked on my first musical, Pacific Overtures, Steve Sondheim said to me when we were in rehearsals, he said, get ready for it. He said, if people like the show, they'll talk about me, and if they don't like it, they're going to talk about you. So I think you're right. Frequently, the book writer comes in for more than his fair share of lumps. I think we are all still too close to Big to really be able to intelligently pull it apart and figure out what we would like to have done differently if we had another crack at it. I think that from the book writer's point of view, there probably was another way to reimagine the story as it was told in the screenplay, which might have opened the show up in theatrical ways which we didn't have access to, because I probably hewed more closely to the structure of the story in the film than if I took another crack at it I would like to.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you saw Big. You're an expert book writer. Do you think John's right in his criticism of his own book?
Well, it's very difficult to say why a show works and doesn't work. There are elements, subcutaneous elements below the surface that you can't even guess at. People say, how can you do it? How can professionals who have been successful and who have been at it all these years get together, a group of them, and then produce a show that doesn't work? And the fact is, it's very easy. There are so many elements, and there's such a surprise when you see them up on the stage finally together. Not just the book and the score together with an orchestra and with the cast and the sets and it's a surprise. And there are things you can't guess at. Now, who knows what happened on that show? You can get, there's an old saying that when you open a show out of town, and they were lucky enough to have gone out of town. On my show, we're not, because it's heavy and expensive, both. I mean, it's expensive to go out of town no matter what kind
Titanic.
of show you have. Yeah. The fact is that it opens up, and then everyone says after the first performance in front of an audience, the surprises are overwhelming. Well, the 11 o'clock number is no good, is what they call the final number in the show. Well, you don't know that's true. It might have come at 11:15 because your show's too long, the audience past their bedtime. It might have been that there was a song earlier, or it repeated a book scene. It's programming, it's everything put together. On the case of Big, you don't know what it was that didn't happen. It had energy, it was witty, it was smart. How dependent was the entire project originally on Tom Hanks? Hard to know. Mm-hmm. What was the picture Big a kid's vehicle? Because it gets dicey in the second act, quite adult in the second act. It's just impossible, and John's absolutely right. It's too soon. I have a rule of thumb. I can't discuss what happened, right or wrong, until I no longer have the entire show memorized. It's true. By the time a show opens, you know every line in it. You can lie in bed and do the show from beginning to end. You've seen it so many times. Well, it starts to fade, and when it starts to go away, then
John will come back and it'll be full of reasons as to why it didn't.
As soon as
but you did say something I found interesting about, just in terms of writing the book, where you said maybe you adhered a little too closely to the movie. Is it not a rule of thumb in writing a book, particularly one that's adapted from a movie, that it might be best to pick a movie that isn't that great, that is flawed, because then as the book writer you can improve upon it and find something new to do with it and make it into a musical, as opposed to taking a movie like Big, which was a pretty damn successful movie.
Well, I mean, I think that there are, just from the point of view of what the audience's expectations are when they come into the theater, you are always better off if you're working with relatively obscure source material, because then you are not up against people's memory of what the movie or indeed the novel or the play was like the first time around. In the case of Big, and I talked about structure before, which is the sort of the essence of book writing, it seems to me. And the structure of the film, in some ways, I think, is problematic in terms of musical theater adaptation. Now, we were aware of this going in, and I thought about it a lot, but in the end, the problems which come up initially often are the problems that are still dogging you at the end. Big is a movie about a kid who makes an impulsive wish. The wish comes true, and then he has to kind of wait 6 weeks until he can undo the wish. And in the meantime, he has enormous adventures and is drawn into a kind of an adult world, which provides him with adventures beyond what he thought he was going to get involved with. But it does mean that you have a main character who, unlike most main characters in musicals, does not declare an impassioned wish to achieve something early on. You don't then and then you follow him struggling and overcoming obstacles to try and get it. So we had a problematic main character from a musical theater point of view, it seems to me. Yeah. But as Peter says, by the time I've forgotten the show, I may change my mind.
Right.
Well, there's there's a paradox in the question, and that is that oftentimes, if the idea is the producer's idea, then it'll be a well-known film, because that's where he got the idea from.
Right.
The producer once says, "Boy, I did Some Like It Hot when we did Sugar," and everyone said, "Boy, what a wonderful film!" That was the producer's idea, and it made a successful show. There are others who, for instance, when Fosse did Sweet Charity, it was a fabulous film, but no one had seen it in this country because it was Italian. It was Fellini. There are others Sunset Boulevard has made a successful show. You may not like it, or you may love it, but it's made a more off. The problem is that not successful films. Why wasn't it successful? And maybe the reason it wasn't successful is exactly the reason you shouldn't do it anywhere else either. Right. In other words, it didn't work. Or there are things that you, as I started to say about Big. Take, for instance, Nick and Nora. Nick and Nora, it turns out, belongs to Myrna Loy and Bill Powell. It really belongs to. I know someone went to me and said, "Why didn't you do Roman Holiday?" It's Audrey Hepburn, it's William Wyler, it's Rome. And all three of those things will not be present
Can't be repeated on the stage.
When you did it. On the other hand, when I did Woman of the Year, I had Bacall. You wouldn't do that. I mean, if you're going to erase Hepburn, you'd better get some other icon to do it with.
Right.
You don't erase her. You simply say, "Oh, well, that's..." So you get another, and you bring it up to date and make it a different medium. That was newspapers, that became television.
Right.
And so when we did that, that was a very well-known and good film. I would recommend against using, less famous is one thing. Not successful pictures is not such a good idea.
Now, John, when you say that the book writer is always going to take his lumps, why? Why are you the favorite? Why are you guys the favorite target on Broadway? Great score. It was a wonderful score. Great sets. The book was lousy. And also, this is what I hear every time a show is in production. Good score, things are going well, but the book needs work. It's always the book needs work.
Let me tell you why. I believe very firmly, and I've been doing this for nearly, for 35 years. And first of all, I've done 15 Broadway shows. Now, what have I done? I've done the Kander and Ebb show. I've done the Richard Rodgers show. I did 1776, which was 80% dialogue. That was the Sherman Edwards show. I've done, and you go right down the list. I'm now doing the Maury Eston show. Now, Maury's the composer, and he's done a wonderful job. But I've seen it referenced in the press now 2 or 3 or 4 times as the Maury Eston show in the New York Times and Variety and so forth. You start to think people don't know what a libretto is, or a book. Libretto is not the world's most favorite word for this, which is because operas, it's sort of the scenario.
Opera's for a libretto.
But the fact is, nobody knows, including the critics, what a book writer, they think it's the jokes. Well, it's not the jokes. The actors make those up as they go along. It's got to be the structure. And musical, more than anything else, you've got 2 duties as a book writer. One, tell 2 hours worth of story in 1 hour, because the score is not going to help you tell the story. And the other is to facilitate the score, because it's still a musical. Right. But when you are on what you've mostly done. When I did Will Rogers Follies, everybody said, "Well, there is no book." Well, it was entirely book. Its concept, it was book from beginning to end. Structure, concept, and that's what it is.
Right.
So I'll tell you a fast rule. You can get a great score and a bad book, you will not have a hit, ever. Mm-hmm. You can get a great book and a mediocre score, and you will most likely win. So it is that important, and yet no one has the slightest idea what it is.
Yeah, and that's why, Peter's describing what can be a sort of a frustrating double bind. I mean, I think when people say the show doesn't work, they're book problems, that usually they are right because of what Peter just said, that if the story is being told and told well, whatever the story is, however abstract it may be or however linear it may be, then people will have a satisfying experience at the theater. If the score is spectacular, that makes it a better. If the score is okay, they're still going to have a good time and feel like they have spent a worthwhile evening in the theater. But if the book is not working, the show won't work. So it is in that sense it is frustrating because you sort of deserve your lumps when you get them, but it's nice to get a pat on the back when.
But you
when
don't.
you
It's always the
well.
Cantor and Ebb show and the Richard Rogers
It is,
show and the
but, I mean,
Rogers and Hart. It's never been the Peter Stone show or the John
Peter's
Weidman
absolutely right. I once read a piece about musical books in your newspaper a number of years ago, not written by you, by somebody you should have known better, who referred to Sweeney Todd and said that it really had no book. Well, there's not a lot of talking, but I mean it has a hell of a book,
Yeah.
and if it didn't, it would never work. I mean, there is more episode and incident in that show than there is in probably 3 other musicals, and Hugh Wheeler really,
Terrific book, I think.
the organization of that show really drives it.
But whether it's Joe Stein and what he did on Fiddler, whether it's Masteroff and what he did on Cabaret, whether it's Arthur Lawrence on Gypsy or on West Side Story, Hugh Wheeler on all of those shows.
A little night music.
Hmm?
A little night music Hugh Wheeler did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But others as well. And with Steve, it's the foundation of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people say, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to collaborate? Well, you're really not collaborating in an odd way. Collaborating is what 2 people doing the same thing do. Beaumont and Fletcher. I mean, I can bring it up.
Haskins and Riedel.
See, I'm older than you are, so I remember Beaumont and Fletcher. But anyway, the fact is that take Kaufman and Hart or Lindsay and Krauss.
Right.
Lindsay and Wagner, right? No, Lindsay and Krauss, 2 mayors of New York. She was named after. But we don't do the same thing they do. I don't write music. I don't write lyrics. And they don't write book. You are collaborating in the sense of you are involved as equal partners in a relationship to create a thing, but you're not collaborating in the sense of that you're not writing the same thing. You're individual voices.
Well,
Let me just agree and disagree with that, because I mean, although we talked about public perception of book writers, for me, and this depends a great deal on who you are working with, but one of the great satisfactions of doing this kind of work comes out of the working back and forth of material with a composer or lyricist with whom you are really comfortable and who you are pleased to be working with, and aiming for something which in the end should seem like a seamless piece of writing, as if it had all somehow come out of the same pen. So Peter's absolutely right that you are not collaborating in the sense that there aren't 2 people pacing around the room together writing the dialogue. But for me, there is an enormous satisfaction in the collaborative process, again, depending on who you're collaborating with.
It is certainly a collaborative process. I didn't mean to suggest that it wasn't. And there are many ways of going at it. And I have written the book before there was a note of music. I have had a full score and come in and wrote a book to go with it. And I've worked with the composer and lyricist together. That is to say, nobody gets ahead of anybody else.
Yeah.
You plan it, and that's by far the best. And I don't think you can get away with the other so much anymore.
Is that how you like to work too, John? With
Yes, I mean, I guess the most satisfying collaboration I ever had, writing collaboration, was with Steve Sondheim on Assassins, and we spent about 6 months talking before anybody wrote anything, and we had a very clear vision in our heads of what the shape of the show was, and more than just the shape, what individual moments were going to be about. So we could then write in tandem, even though I finished a hunk of the book before Steve had finished the opening number, because that's just the way it worked out. But that is the most effective way to do it.
Now, is it not true, though, that some of your best stuff ends up on the cutting room floor, so to speak? I mean, you may write a great scene, and all of a sudden the composer and lyricist think, hey, this inspires us to put a song here instead of some snazzy dialogue.
You don't end up on the floor. You end up in the song. What they do is they take
You get the
your
royalties
material.
from the lyrics?
Well, that's a sore point, actually. Composers and lyricists are very, they date back to a time. For instance, let's talk about why a lot of people don't go into book writing. It is custom, though it is not contractual by minimum contract. It is customary that there's 1/3 of the money for the composer, 1/3 for the lyricist, 1/3 for the book writer. Nonsense. It's a 50-50. Half the show is book, half the show is score. If one person writes both, we write the dialogue and the structure. That's two things if you want to put it. So we want, so that part of it, it dates back to when the score was everything in a musical,
Right.
and book was glue.
book was nothing.
Just a few
lead-ins
jokes
and
thrown in,
crossovers,
yeah,
right.
Right.
But customs die hard. Mechanical rights. Nobody watching this has any idea what mechanical rights are. Mechanical rights are what happens to a song or when it is recorded elsewhere.
Well, you guys get nothing if they
Nothing.
record something
Right.
from
The composer
Big or
would
Will Rogers Follies.
rather-
You don't get a thing.
He would rather have his tin ear pounded into than give away one nickel of his mechanical rights.
But the fact is that song may not have existed unless you guys had come along. Might not have existed unless you had come along and provided the dramatic moment
One,
from
you might
which
have
the song came.
You might have, 1, suggested the show, 2, the dramatic moment, 3, the title of the song, 4, the material in it.
Yeah.
May have come straight from the book, but no, that's their province, is the mechanical rights. So they're very tough about that. And it'll be worn away sooner or later.
Well, you're president of the Dramatists Guild.
Well,
Are you,
in that case,
is
I
he
have to
fighting?
be-
Is he fighting for your
I
rights,
have to be
John?
impartial. I have to be impartial in that.
These are facts of life. I mean, Richard Maltby and David Shire, with whom I collaborated on Big, had constructed at least one, and I think 2, very successful off-Broadway shows, which made them substantial sums of money out of songs which had been written for shows which didn't work.
Right.
And whoever the book writer was on those shows, I assure you, did not put together an off-Broadway review of the scenes. That's the way. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. That's really the way it is.
Right.
That's right.
Now
I do it because I love it. I love the musical process. I love the first orchestra reading. I enjoy I enjoy the problems.
Yeah.
A music, it becomes a jigsaw puzzle, which is it was Larry Gelbart who said, if Hitler's alive, I hope he's out of town working on a musical. The fact is that if you don't like that,
Get out
being
of
in
business.
trouble, you shouldn't be in the business, because I sort of, every show's in trouble.
Yeah.
Every show. First preview, every show's in trouble. And it really is. You can count the exceptions really on one hand.
Is book writing a dying art form now? You look at the big Lloyd Webber shows, Phantom of the Opera, Cats. Is there a book to Cats? I don't think so.
Won the
Miss-
Tony for book. Beat
right.
me.
Well, Mr. Elliott got
Miss-
it.
Miss-
Yeah.
like-
T.S. Eliot, who
Well.
was dead 15 years before anyone he knew there was going to be a musical, won the book.
Now, I don't want to digress, but just for a moment, I think I remember you once telling me at the Tony Award you were half out of your seat
I
to
was.
accept the.
I was rising. But something should have told me when I saw T.S. Eliot's widow sitting in the house. I would have known that the Schuberts would not have brought her over to lose.
What were you at My One and Only that year? You're up against.
Up against Cats.
And you lost out.
I lost out once again to actors in animal suits.
Right. But gentlemen, let's face it. I mean, the book. I saw Phantom of the Opera not too long ago, and the book is terrible. It takes 30 minutes for the damn thing to get going until you get to the first song. People have no idea what's going on. The book to Les Mis is all over the
Michael,
place. Miss Saigon.
Michael, you've just proved our point. All it's got going for it is the book. If the songs are nice, you can remember 2 of them. All that's going
But surely,
in Phantom of the
Peter,
Opera is the
Peter,
book.
You're not going
All
to argue
that's
that
going on Les Mis is
you're
the
not going
book.
to argue that the book to Phantom of the Opera is good.
No, I'm saying it's the only reason it's success is because of the book.
But the basic story, though, which was written from the novel, from the novel, not from.
It was
whoever did the book.
totally altered, changed, rewritten, selected from, heightened, completely remodeled.
But I guess my point is that does the book really count anymore? If you can throw on a helicopter and a chandelier and a big Andrew Lloyd Webber,
Yeah, sure.
Who cares if it's any
no,
good?
no, but sure. I mean, for better or for worse, without having any opinion of the quality of the book of Phantom of the Opera at all, I mean that. That's not a polite way of saying. The audiences at that show find that story compelling. And you could argue it's been told better before, or you could argue that this is the best way it's ever been told, the most effective way it's ever been told. But the reason they are there at the end is because they find the way the story is told compelling. And you could say that's because they didn't completely ruin it, or you could say it's because we could argue about that.
I think it's that way. I think
well,
they did their
maybe,
best
but
to ruin it, but the story is so
And
good,
the
and
same
the romance
thing,
is so
Miss
great.
Saigon, they like the story.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
And Les Mis, they like the story. It's the story that's winning. Now,
But as craftsmen, doesn't it bother you that there isn't a lot of neatness to these books? The
Yes.
lines really aren't that good. The lead-ins to songs aren't so great. The character development really isn't there. The structure isn't great.
Like bringing up the ethics issue in the last Dole Clinton debate.
I
He's
know.
gonna
I'm getting out my
jab
pen,
away
but-
until somebody gets.
you're going to get negative ratings for this.
Yeah.
The fact is that, look, what you're talking about is arguable. Certain critics liked it, certain critics didn't like it. For instance, this Phantom had a very innovative concept that all the other Phantoms had not, and that is that the trip down into the sewers and into the thing and the unmasking happened in the third scene of the show, not at the end, which it had,
Right.
traditionally. Now, it mystifies me why they did that, but there's no arguing with its success. It's very opulent. That we are dealing in an age of scenery as choreography, and all sorts of other new things. But I can think of spectacles that have died the death of a dog because the story didn't work. Now, the story, you cannot say it would not be enough to put the story on the stage without a book writer present who ordered it, who structured it, who selected and did all the other things to it, which is as much book writing as the dialogue.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes left. I just want to ask you both what you're working on. John, I believe you're working on another
Steve Sondheim and I
show.
are collaborating on a new show which has been commissioned by the Kennedy Center, and it's supposed to be finished sooner rather than later.
And how do you work? Do you sit with them every day? And
We've approached it, it has been interrupted by a variety of things over the course of the last sort of year and a half. But now, again, we've spent a great deal of time talking, and we now, with a view of the show and kind of an outline to work from, have gone away to do our individual jobs, and we speak every few days and get together.
And you fax him pages of dialogue, and he...
We'd be more comfortable exchanging material. He'll play something for me, and I will hand him something rather than send it through a fax machine.
And Peter, a brilliant article in the Daily News
know.
explored your new project.
Well, Titanic is imminent, and it will be coming in this season. And I'm very excited about it and happy about it. And I don't say that automatically. There's some shows I'm sitting wondering what's going to happen. I'm very pleased with this one. But I'm also, 1776 is getting a Broadway revival
Right.
this season.
Right.
Which, by the way, I think 1776 has one of the best books ever written.
Absolutely.
Well, there's so much of it. That's the reason. And I'm involved John has done this, and I envy him for it. And I'm doing it now. A revival that wasn't mine, Finian's Rainbow. I'm redoing the book as he did to Anything Goes. And I've got another
dialogue there?
Yeah, well, it's structure.
Yeah.
It's structure more than anything,
It really is about structure, pace. It's about
And that racism theme that you have to
which is terrific.
What I wish-
deal with, yeah.
Yeah, but it's terrific in the show. It's wonderful.
It doesn't work yet.
Oh, it's more now than ever.
Well, you have to come back and tell us about that on a separate.
No,
That's-
no, I won't.
No?
I've had it with this.
That's
I've never had a worse time in
Peter.
my entire life.
Please, don't say
I've got a splitting headache, and goodbye forever.
Peter, I'm sorry you have a splitting headache now, but I'm sure Titanic will be a big hit and will cure all of your ails. John Weidman, Peter Stone, thanks so much for being our guests on Theater Talk.
So it's 1997, and one of the biggest musicals heading to Broadway is Andrew Lloyd Webber's Whistle Down the Wind.
Which opened in Washington at the end of December. A $10 million musical based on the 1961 Haley Mills movie about a girl who discovers a fugitive hiding in her barn whom she comes to believe is Jesus Christ. The reviews were not good for the latest Lloyd Webber opus. The Washington Post called it dull, attacked Andrew's score, said the book was confused and muddled. The Washington Times, I believe, called it turgid, bloated, and bizarre. The review in Variety was okay. It said the show showed promise and could probably be fixed by Hal Prince, the director. What's interesting about this, though, is that Andrew Lloyd Webber is so big and so important that he really can't go anywhere to try out a new show. And the day those reviews came out, I was calling all over Washington to have them all faxed to me, and then I wrote a story in the Daily News about it. He can run, but he can't hide.
Away.
He
Right,
can run,
yes.
but he can't hide. Yeah. People I've talked to, theater people I've talked to who have gone down to see the show in Washington, are not as harsh on it as the critic from the Washington Post is. They do, though, agree that the storyline needs to be focused, that it really goes off in many different directions. It's hard to follow. They praise, however, Andrew Lloyd Webber's score, which a lot of them say is his best since Jesus Christ Superstar. And I've heard a couple of the songs, and I think that they're very good. They're sort of heavy religious things, but rather tuneful and interesting. You know, Lloyd Webber's a pro, God knows, and certainly Hal Prince, his director, is. So I'm sure they can work it out. I wonder, though, whether, even if they make it a perfect show, if the subject matter is just not too dark
It's
for
kind
an
of dark,
audience.
they say, yes.
It's a very dark show.
How's
it's
the
a
Steinman
downer.
book?
Simon didn't write the book. He wrote the lyrics.
Oh, he wrote the lyrics.
The
all right.
lyrics are okay. I think, though, even if they get it in great shape, audiences might be a little resistant to it because it's so dark. It ain't Cats and it ain't the Phantom of the Opera.
So we're just going to have to follow it on Theater Talk, wait and see.
Blow the whistle and whistle down the wind. Theater Talk.
And that's it. Happy New Year, Michael.
Happy New Year to
And
you,
Happy
too.
New Year to our viewers. Tune in next time to Theater Talk.